Hello again, YouTube, and welcome to the first in a promised series of videos in which I'm going to be looking at the TV series Doctor Who. I'm going to be taking an episode-by-episode approach to the show, and I'm going to be starting with the first series written by Russell T Davies, the resurrected Doctor Who. I will probably be looking at some of the classic Who episodes as well when I get round to watching them, but I'm not quite as experienced with the older episodes as I am with the newer shows. Although I did, when I was young, I did catch some episodes of Doctor Who. They were largely just repeats, and it never made that much of an impression. I think I was far too young to be caught up in the phenomena. I mean, I was born in 1984, which was about the time Doctor Who was dying originally, so I never made that much of an impact. I knew what it was. I knew that it was around because my mum and my dad used to watch it, but it never made that much of an impact. But I was, when I heard that it was being resurrected, I was interested. I was interested simply because of the subject matter. I like speculative fiction, science fiction, fantasy, horror, anything to that effect, anything that has a certain degree of imagination around it, or that uses imaginative subjects to explore ideas or concepts. I think that's quite wonderful, and Doctor Who does that beautifully. It really does, even though some individual episodes suck. In fact, some entire series suck. Even in many of the bad ones, there's something interesting going on. There is something to latch onto, and we are definitely going to be seeing that in the Russell T Davies era and Stephen Moffat era for that matter. Anywho, the first episode, I watched it again quite recently. The first episode of the Russell T Davies era, the resurrected Doctor Who, is called Rose, after the new assistant character played by Billie Piper. And this wasn't the first episode that I saw, actually, of the resurrected Who. The first episode that I saw came much later. The first episode I saw was actually the episode Dalek. And thank God it was. Really, thank God it was, because that episode in and of itself alone made me a dyed-in-the-wool Whovian or homosexual or whatever you want to call us. I think that episode is wonderful, but we'll get into that very, very soon because that is coming up. But I didn't see this one until later when I went back to watch the previous episodes. And I must say, if this had been the first episode I saw, I doubt very much my enthusiasm for the show would have been as profound as it originally was. It's problematic. It's problematic for a number of reasons. First of all, and arguably foremost, it's a pilot episode. It's a pilot episode of an older show, a sort of reimagining of an older show, although it does technically continue on from the older shows. And that is its principal failing. It's its principal problem. The problem with pilot episodes of anything is there's a lot of time that has to be taken to establish things. You have to establish characters, you have to establish the rules of the universe, you have to establish back mythology and the tone of the show, the way it's going to go. You have to set things up, especially if there are going to be running story elements, which there are in the Resurrected Who. There are running story elements and story arcs that not only go over seasons, but which actually transcend seasons. So the stuff that's set up here, which is tied up loads of way down the line, and that is problematic. It's interesting as well. I mean, it's part of storytelling. It's a problem of storytelling, is that when you are establishing a universe or even re-establishing a universe, you have to take time out. You have to take time out to establish, okay, here are your protagonists, here's the universe that they're in, here's the setting, here's what's going to happen, here's what we're going to do with these ideas and these characters and so on and so forth. It's a problem. It's a problem because other elements suffer, and the elements that suffer here are the plot and the villains. That is a big problem for Who, because there is a very definite case that Doctor Who is about the monsters, it's about the villains. They are really what make Doctor Who, far and beyond any intrigue that the character might provide. And that is a problem here. It's a huge problem because the villains, the monsters in this episode are really underbaked. They are really underbaked. They're just They're actually a return. Apparently, I don't know because I'm not that I'm not very knowledgeable about the original show, but they are a returning or recurring villain, which is the animated store shop dummies. You know, the living plastic creatures, which are animated by a central intelligence, and it's okay. I mean, I understand why they took this route and didn't go for like the Daleks or the Cybermen right off. It's because they're trying to ease you in. They're trying to show you both old fans of the old Doctor Who. They're trying to reassure them that this is still their show, that it's still something that they can watch and enjoy and appreciate, but they're also trying to draw in new audiences. So starting with something as as esoteric as the Daleks, or as something that is so specific in terms of its imagery and its aesthetics and whatnot, may have been alienating. Pun not intended. It may have been alienating for a new audience. So they went for something softer. They went for something smaller that could be wrapped up very quickly once all of the establishing stuff has been done. And that's kind of a problem, because it means that the episode lacks a certain dynamism. Even though it's quite long, it's 45 minutes long, there is a certain lack of dynamism to it. And it's also quite jumpy. There are problems with the way the story is told, in that it's like little bits and pieces of bursts of information in between action sequences, which is fine. It keeps up a certain pace and rhythm, but it can get a little bit frustrating because the show hasn't really established a definite tone or feeling yet. There's a lot of playing around with ideas and trying to see whether is it going to be directed like this, are we going to tell the story like that, is it going to have a sort of hyper-modern feeling to it, or is it going to be hokey and slightly retro feeling. It comes down on a happy medium between the two later on, when the show takes on a more definite tone. But in this episode, it's not quite there. Understandably, it's the first episode of the show, and that's its weakness. That is a real weakness. It doesn't blow me away. It really doesn't. I doubt it blew anybody away. It needs, you need to give it time. You need to grow into this season. The next episode is really good, and the episode after that is wonderful. But you do need to give it time. For my money, the show doesn't really hit its stride until the episode Dalek. But, that said, all those complaints aside, there are some really interesting things going on in this episode. First of all, we have Christopher Eccleston establishing how he is going to play the Doctor. And one of the joys of Doctor Who, that I've discovered anyway, is that you get to go on this journey with the actors, with the writers and the directors. You get to experience how new people with new ideas and new preconceptions of the show alter the show and change it and bring new things to it. And Christopher Eccleston is really interesting. He has a very different tone from David Tennant, who would arguably become far more identified as the character, or Matt Smith later on, who again becomes very positively identified with the character. Christopher Eccleston only does one season, but he's very good. He's very interesting. He comes into it with this slightly cheeky northern quality, which is counterbalanced by this potential for great authority and anger. And this is something new that they introduce in the episode, which I don't think was established in any of the older ones. There is obviously a gap. There's a gap, not only in terms of time, but in terms of story, between the last episode of the classic Doctor Who and the first episode of the new Doctor Who. A huge gap. And what happens, we have established in this episode, we have references, only very oblique references, mind, to the Time War. And the Time War is something that has been introduced in the background to lend not only the characters some gravitas and some level of intrigue. It gives the Doctor something that allows him to develop and have a certain ambiguity about him, but also it gives the series back mythology, it gives it dynamism, it gives it tension, and it also establishes story concepts that pay off far later. In fact, there is the stuff that's originally established in this episode that doesn't pay off until the finale of season 5. Way down the line. Way. down the line. And that's not a matter of, I can tell you as a storyteller myself right now, that's not a matter of intention. It's not that they started this episode with definite ideas of where they were going to go 5 seasons down the line. That's not the way it works with these things. Rather, they're ideas that are thrown in because good storytellers know that you can use them to pay off later. You can use these little nuggets of mythology and story to accrue and build upon, and eventually you get something like the end of season 5 or the big finale for David Tennant's character in the massive Christmas special where the Time Lords come back and he's regenerated into Matt Smith, and so on and so forth. All of these elements are established here in this first episode, and it's done reasonably well. I must say the little story elements are peppered throughout really, really well. There isn't much just standing around talking, which I like. There's not a great deal of exposition in this episode, which is, again, a problem for pilot episodes by and large. There isn't a great deal of exposition. Most of the back mythology is actually established during the action. It's shown rather than told, which is good. It's a good dynamic way of telling story. The Christopher Eccleston character is immediately intriguing and quite fun to play with. The Rose character is good. I mean, I like the Rose character. She's interesting because she is not a stereotype. She could have very easily been just a chav. She could have very easily been just that and been a kind of foil character for the Doctor. Oh, she's so stupid, she's gone and gotten herself into trouble again. She could have been that, just the damsel in distress, but with a slightly cheeky edge. She's not that. She actually has ambiguities, and she has cleverness, she has bravery. There's a lot going on with the Rose character, and she will develop as the show goes on. And Billie Piper's really good. She's really, really good as Rose. I mean, I really like her. Also, a lot of the ancillary stuff. There's a lot of something else that this episode changes from previous Doctor Who series is that the assistant or the companion has a lot going on. They have a lot of character and they actually have lives going on outside of the TARDIS, which is something that wasn't done before, really. They were just references to who they were before. They technically, characters like Sarah Jane Smith and whatnot in the old episodes, although they had their moments, from what I understand, and please correct me if I'm wrong, they are largely just ciphers for storytelling in the old episodes. They're just characters to put in jeopardy or to save the Doctor when he needs it, or to set up or to explain to the audience. They're that kind of characters. Rose does have that, definitely. She is a character who will get herself into trouble, as we will see later on, and she is a character who will act as the audience's eyes for various different reasons. But she also has other things going on as well. I mean, she has a boyfriend, she has Mickey, she has a mother, Jackie, and Jackie Tyler is great. Jackie Tyler is a really good character. She is comic relief initially. Her relationship with the Doctor is wonderful. It's this incredible sort of antagonistic relationship that they have, but it's almost like mother-in-law, son-in-law. You know, they have this certain tension between them, which is Rose, essentially. But at the same time, they quite like one another. They do appreciate one another, and that develops as the show goes on. It develops really, really well. And Jackie, becomes really cool later on. She becomes a really good character. Mickey, I hate in this episode. I absolutely hate Mickey in this episode. I hate him for the same reason I hated Rory in the Matt Smith era. I hate Mickey Smith in this episode. He is nothing but the comic foil. There is nothing else to him. He exists to get into jeopardy and to set up this kind of love triangle thing between the Doctor, Rose, and himself. And it's a bit boring and unnecessary. Completely unnecessary. Almost everything in this episode with Mickey is filler, and it's a bit frustrating. But, that said, Mickey does develop later on. He gets a lot of character development. He becomes actually quite a good character, as does Rory. I don't know, for all his faults, I didn't like Rory initially. I really didn't like him. I thought he was terrible. But he does become a really good character, and so does Mickey later on. In this episode, boring and pointless. But he does develop at some point. So, it's not terrible. It's not terrible. But it certainly doesn't scale the heights that the show potentially does later on. It doesn't even come close to them. It's an adequate pilot episode, and nothing else. It's fine. It does what it attempts to do competently, by and large, but it doesn't set fireworks off. There are no big ideas in this episode, like there certainly are in later episodes. There's no big ideas. There's nothing particularly engaging or interesting apart from the re-establishment of the universe, and once that's done, it's kind of over. It's just a case of tying up the plot, which it does adequately. It does fine. It does it through the characters, which is good. It's not artificial. It doesn't feel synthetic as such. It doesn't feel tacked on. It's just a little underbaked. That's all. Necessarily so because of the nature of a pilot episode. But that is my review of the episode Rose. Next, I can't remember what the next episode is called, but I think I can't remember what it's called, but it is a fairly good one, and I will see you